everyone, so for today we will be discussing about prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Now hopefully at the end of this lesson, you guys will be able to distinguish prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells according to their distinguishing features. Now, all living things can be divided into three basic domains of life. As you can see in the picture, we have domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. The primarily single-celled organisms found in the bacteria and archaea domains are what we call as prokaryotes. These organisms are made of prokaryotic cells, which is the smallest, simplest, and most ancient cells. Organisms in the domain eukarya are made of eukaryotic cells, which are more complex than the prokaryotic cells. These organisms, which we call as eukaryotes, can either be unicellular or multicellular. This includes animals, plants, fungi, as well as protists. Many people are still unclear on whether yeasts or fungi are either prokaryote or eukaryote. Well, the answer is that both of these are eukaryotes and they share a similar cell structure to all other eukaryotes. Now, we all know that organisms that we have right now are far more complex than the organisms which lived billions of years ago. Now, the question is, how did eukaryotes evolve from prokaryotes? Now, we all owe it to the explanation of the endosymbiosis or the endosymbiotic theory. Okay, so eukaryotes developed at least 2.7 billion years ago, following 1 to 1.5 billion years of prokaryotic evolution. Now, scientists believe that the nucleus and other eukaryotic features may have first formed after a prokaryotic organism swallowed up another. The engulfed organism would have then contributed to the functioning of the one that swallowed it up. Now, a vital step in the evolution of eukaryotic cells was the acquisition of membrane-enclosed subcellular organelles, which allows the development of the complex characteristics of these cells. The organelles are thought to have been acquired as a result of the association of prokaryotic cells with the ancestor of eukaryotes. So, here is where endosymbiosis comes in. Now, the belief that eukaryotic cells evolved from a symbiotic association of prokaryotes is actually very well supported by many studies of mitochondria and chloroplasts, which are thought to have evolved from bacteria living in large cells. Now, the reason being is that both mitochondria and chloroplasts are very much unlike bacteria in terms of size. Also, like bacteria, they reproduce by dividing in two. Most importantly, both mitochondria and chloroplasts contain their own DNA, which encodes some of their components. Now, each time the organelle divides, the mitochondrial and the chloroplast DNAs are replicated, and the genes they encode are transcribed within the organelle and translated on organelle ribosomes. Therefore, mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own genetic systems which are entirely separate from the nuclear genome of the cell. Furthermore, the ribosomes and ribosomal RNAs of these organelles are more closely related to those of bacteria than to those encoded by the nuclear genomes of eukaryotes. So, living things are actually classified into two large groups based on the presence or absence of nucleus in their cells. Now, the picture that you see here on the slide is how the nucleus looks like. Now, you can see that although nucleus is a part of a cell, it still has its own parts. Now, the question is, how do we distinguish or how do we group these organisms? The answer is with the presence or absence of the nucleus. Now, Organisms whose cells have no definite nucleus are called prokaryotes. Now, bacteria and their relatives are prokaryotes. The cells of prokaryotes are what we call as prokaryotic cells, and prokaryotic cells are typically much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Most prokaryotic cells are tiny, about just 1/10 the width and 1,000th of the volume of eukaryotic cells. The tiny size of the prokaryotic cells is the reason scientists cannot view their internal structures before the invention of the electron microscope. Also, prokaryotic cells have a less complex internal structure than eukaryotic cells. They also do not have a nuclear membrane, and most lack organelles surrounded by membranes. Although prokaryotic cells contain fewer internal structures, they can perform all of the activities of life, including reproduction and also response to the environment. Because of their small size and comparatively simple structure, prokaryotic cells are considered to be the forerunners of eukaryotic cells. Next up, we have the eukaryotes. Now, eukaryotes, on the other hand, are organisms that have a nucleus surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Plants and animals are considered to be eukaryotes. Now, the cells of eukaryotes are called eukaryotic cells, and they are definitely bigger in size as compared to prokaryotes. Now, the structure of eukaryotes are also far more complex than prokaryotes. Now, in this table that we have here, it compares how prokaryotes and eukaryotes are different in terms of the DNA, the internal structures, the size of the ribosome, how they reproduce, and their average size. Now, as you can see here, DNAs of prokaryotes are considered to be naked, which means histones are not present, as compared to eukaryotes, where DNA is associated with histones. The prokaryote's DNA is also circular in terms of its shape, while the eukaryote's DNA is linear. In prokaryotes, genes do not contain introns as compared to the introns present in the genes of eukaryotes. Also, the DNA of the prokaryotes are just found in the cytoplasm, and we don't really call it, and we call it nucleoid, while the DNA found in eukaryotes is found in the nucleus. In terms of internal structures, like what I have mentioned earlier, prokaryotes do not really have membrane-bound organelles as compared to the presence of membrane-bound organelles in eukaryotes. And ribosomes of prokaryotes have 7Ts, while eukaryotes have 8Ts. In terms of reproduction, prokaryotes can reproduce asexually by binary fission, and eukaryotes can reproduce asexually by mitosis and sexually by meiosis. Now, DNAs of prokaryotes is singular, or we call it haploid, while DNAs of eukaryotes are usually paired or diploid. The average size of prokaryotes it ranges around 1 to 5 micrometers, while eukaryotes are definitely larger, and they can they can be from 10 to 100 micrometers. Now, the question now is, aside from the fact that they have very different structures and also means of reproduction, is there any similarities between, or are there any similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes? And this is a Venn diagram showing you the similarities and also the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now, apart from all the differences that I have mentioned earlier, it's also important to note that they are similar because they both contain DNA, they both contain ribosomes, they both have cell membranes, and they both have cytoplasm.